There was a rumor about a yokai called Mr. Gnawbones at the elementary school we attended. It was more of a school ghost story than a yokai tale. When children went to the back of the school building alone, they had to say, "Pray forgive our intrusion, for we are but humble wanderers in the dark," to protect themselves. I first heard this story when I was probably in third or fourth grade. There was an older girl who lived in my neighborhood, and although we were in different grades, we were good friends. Let's call her Yoko. I often went to play at her house after school, and when our dismissal times matched, we'd walk home together. It happened on a day just before summer vacation. I was walking home with Yoko, and there were a couple of other older students with us. There were also two girls from my class who usually walked home with me. As we were chatting noisily about something, one of the older students looked at the other three and said, "Should we tell these kids about it now?" I felt a mix of fear and anticipation, wondering, what could it be? But Yoko, looking at my face, said, Saya's a bit of a scaredy cat," creating an atmosphere that suggested they shouldn't tell the secret. My name is Saya, and the way Yoko said it made it seem like the other kids wouldn't get to hear the secret because I was too afraid. Thinking this wasn't right, I told Yoko, "I'll be fine." The other older students looked at Yoko with a "what should we do" kind of expression. Yoko double-checked with me. "Are you sure you're okay?" And when I answered, "Yeah, I'm okay," we were allowed to hear the secret story. "Do you know about the boundary story at our school?" one of the older students asked. We didn't know anything about it, so we said no. The older student, thinking for a moment, said, "The boundary is the line between where you can go and where you can't, between the grades that can hear about it and those that can't, and between those who have heard it and those who haven't." I started to regret a bit, feeling like this was getting scarier than I had expected. "Hey, do you know why kids aren't supposed to go to the back of the school alone?" the older student asked. I had never thought about it and just assumed it was forbidden because it was forbidden. "It's because it's on the other side of the boundary," they said. Another older student continued, "You know that small ditch right behind the school building? The one that runs straight from the wall to outside the fence? That's the boundary. If kids cross that boundary alone, they might not come back alive." Another older kid continued the story. "Beyond the boundary, there's a rat monster called Mr. Gnawbones." When they said rat monster, I couldn't help but think of the mouse grandmother from a picture book I had read in kindergarten. So even though the story had been scary up to this point, I felt a bit conflicted, wondering if this was just an imitation of Grandma Mouse. One of my classmates answered with a slight laugh, "That sounds kind of funny." The older student sharply retorted with a straight face, "It's not funny at all. Mr. Gnawbones doesn't forgive humans who see his form. These humans might spread word of what they've seen. So if his form is seen, he hacks at them with an axe. If you swear, I solemnly swear for as long as my childhood shall last, never to speak of this to anyone before being attacked. And if he accepts this, you might be spared." The kids who had the worst experience are dead now. You have to swear you'll never talk, but one of them got scared and ran away. Then anyone would think they might talk, right? Mr. Gnawbones chased after the kid who ran and hacked at them from behind with his axe. Mr. Gnawbones is very strong, but he's small, about the size of a kindergartner. So when he strikes from behind, he hits around the waist or bottom. That kid's hip bone was split open too, and they couldn't move anymore. A heavy atmosphere settled over us. "Did they die?" one of my classmates asked. No, they weren't dead yet at that time. But with such a serious injury, they must have been in so much pain and near death that they couldn't swear not to tell anyone, right? We nodded silently. Then, because they were in pain and couldn't speak, just moaning, Mr. Gnawbones got really angry. He suspected that this kid was definitely planning to talk, so he stomped on the fallen child's back with all his might. Guess what happened? I involuntarily gulped. The older students continued to tell the terrifying story in a matter-of-fact tone. When he stomped down hard, thump! The intestines whizzed out like a rope from where it was hacked open. The bone was broken too, and the wound was so deep that there was a hole all the way through, and that's where it came out. That's not all. Mr. Gnawbones was still angry, so this time he stomped on the kid's head with a bam. Then the skull cracked and the face was slightly crushed. We third graders huddled together in terror. The child attacked by Mr. Gnawbones was found by the security guard late that night. But at first the guard didn't think what was lying there was human. Leaves were haphazardly covering the body. The face illuminated by the flashlight was crushed sideways with teeth sticking out, looking like a rat's face. The intestines protruding from the wound in the waist looked like a long rat's tail. There was one muddy footprint each on the child's back and head, but they weren't human footprints. They were the footprints of an incredibly large beast. No one could tell what kind of footprints they were. The other child somehow managed to get Mr. Gnawbones' forgiveness and return, but committed suicide out of guilt for being the only survivor. In the notebook left behind by this child, the events of that day and information about Mr. Gnawbones were written. It said that he first appears in the form of a cat-sized rat, so deal with him while he's still in rat form. When children go to the back of the school alone, they are to say, "Pray forgive our intrusion, for we are but humble wanderers in the dark," and pretend they can't see. The story of Mr. Gnawbones was from decades ago, soon after this school was built. Heard an unbelievable story. Just as the older students had said at the beginning about the boundary between those who have heard it and those who haven't, I had now crossed that boundary and could never return to my blissfully ignorant self. For about a week after that, I started having nightmares and was terrified of going to sleep. That summer vacation, there was a science experiment workshop at school. There were several courses, and participating children from different grades would experience them together. Both Yoko and I participated. I was in the course making a large air cannon, and Yoko was in the course making super balls. Before going home after the workshop ended, I borrowed the super ball Yoko had made, and we were playing with it, bouncing it in the second-floor hallway. The super ball Yoko made wasn't a perfect sphere, but was lumpy and uneven, which made it bounce in weird directions. But that was what made it fun, so we stayed behind to play. As we were doing this, the bouncing super ball flew out of the hallway window. It had fallen behind the school. We went to find a teacher to come with us, but they were all in a faculty meeting. "What are you kids still doing here? You should have gone home by now." Yoko and I decided we had no choice but to sneak to the back of the school by ourselves to retrieve the super ball. As we made our way to the back of the school, we agreed that if Mr. Gnawbones appeared, we'd desperately swear to keep his secret, promising never to tell a soul. We called out, "Pray forgive our intrusion, for we are but humble wanderers in the dark," as we stepped over the boundary ditch and cautiously entered the other side. I was so nervous that my knees felt weak and were shaking a little. Behind the school building, there was a place where fallen leaves were gathered, unused boards were piled up, and weeds were growing in patches. We used the open second-floor window as a landmark and searched the area below, but we couldn't find the super ball. Yoko suggested, "Maybe it went under there," and we started lifting the corrugated metal sheets and plywood boards leaning against the wall. At that moment, a large rat leapt out from the gap. It was an enormous rat, as big as a cat. I was so startled that I let out a yelp and collapsed on the spot, but Yoko quickly grabbed a stick lying nearby and started chasing the big rat. She called out to me, "Hurry up, Saya!" That's right, I remembered. The command left in the notebook flashed through my mind. Deal with Mr. Gnawbones while he's still in rat form. As if jolted by an electric current, I snatched up a stick and dashed after Yoko. The big rat wasn't running but hopping along the school building as it fled. Yoko and I chased after it, occasionally trying to hit it with our sticks, but we kept missing and hitting the ground instead. It was hard to aim at the hopping rat. Plus, I was scared of the idea of beating a big rat to death with a stick, so I was swinging timidly and missing by quite a bit. Yoko was probably the same, and we were both squealing in fear as we swung our sticks around. As we chased the big rat, We reached a point where the school building turned at a right angle. Perhaps thinking it was a dead end, the big rat suddenly turned towards us and lunged at Yoko's feet. Both Yoko and I screamed and fell on our bottoms. The rat jumped right past us and hopped back the way it came. This is bad! This is bad! This is bad! We have to hurry before it turns into Mr. Gnawbones. Yoko and I got up and chased after the big rat again. It scurried back to where it was first hiding, behind the corrugated metal sheets and plywood boards. Yoko and I cautiously approached the area with the metal sheets. That's when it happened. The stacked metal sheets and plywood boards suddenly started rattling and shaking violently, as if they were about to come crashing down. With a thud, something shot out from under a plywood board. We saw a thick, long tail emerge, writhing and twisting. The visible part alone must have been about a meter long, I think. It was yellowish in color and about as thick as my arm. The tail began to thrash more violently, making the leaning boards rattle and shake violently, as if they were about to come crashing down. Yoko and I screamed, "We promise we won't tell anyone! We solemnly swear, for as long as our childhood shall last," as we fled the scene. We thought we'd be killed if we didn't run. We had been trying to beat Mr. Gnawbones to death with sticks just moments ago when he was still in rat form. We couldn't imagine he would forgive us for that. We definitely didn't want our intestines to whiz out like a rope. I'm not as fast a runner as Yoko, so she grabbed my hand and pulled me along as we ran desperately. We ran all the way across the boundary and further to the shadow of the after-school care building. From there, we fearfully looked back, but all we could see was the tail writhing beyond the weeds, and soon even that disappeared into the gap behind the stacked metal sheets. It seemed we had managed to escape. We gave up on finding the Super Ball. Since then, true to our promise, we never spoke to anyone about Mr. Gnawbones. But when I came across something that said, "Yokai become extinct when they are no longer spoken of," I decided to talk about it. Although he's not harmless, given that he can make your intestines whiz out like a rope, as long as we keep our promise not to speak of him for as long as our childhood lasts, we won't be attacked.